Somalia's Islamic Courts Union is calling on foreign Muslim fighters to join what it says is a holy war against Ethiopia.
The United Nations is urging restraint on all sides, saying the outbreak of violence could have disastrous consequences for civilians.
The call for foreign fighters to join the courts follows days of clashes with pro-government troops. Al-Jazeera's John Terrett has more.
Until now, the war between the Union of Islamic Courts and the Ethiopian-backed interim Somali government has largely been fought away from TV crews in the hot, semi-desert scrubland that is Somalia. Now, Al Jazeera's exclusive pictures offer a glimpse of the men who are fighting on the UIC's side. They reveal a band of well-armed, fit young men who seem confident and eager for battle. On Friday, Ethiopian forces crossed the border into Somalia in search of courts fighters. This UIC spokesman says his men will force Ethiopian troops out of the country again at gunpoint.
The area that we fought the Ethiopian forces on, as you can see in front of you, is not the Ethiopian land, it is Somaliland.
For its part, the Ethiopian Foreign Ministry says it's running out of patience with the Union of Islamic Courts. Within the past 24 hours, the United Nations Security Council has called on all parties to draw back from conflict and reopen dialogue. In response, the UIC called on Muslims to launch a jihad or holy war against Addis Ababa for supporting the interim Somali government.
I think until now the Somalis they have enough forces to defend about their country against the Ethiopian invasion to Somalia, and they doesn't need other fighters to come to Somalia, because we have a lot of people who are ready to defend about their country, and the Ethiopians are not fighting against the Islamic court, but they're fighting against the Somali people. About more than 10 million, so the million Somali people, they're fighting against them because they invaded, they occupied their land and their cities, and they're causing every day for the ordinary citizen in that area a problem, and they're taking their animals for food, and they're raping sometimes the women. So the Somali, they have just cause to fight against the Ethiopians.
And the president of Eritrea, in an exclusive interview with Al Jazeera, denies his forces are helping the UIC to fight and accuses the West of plotting to oust the courts from their position of strength.
Where are the Eritrean forces in Somalia? The people who are filled by false reports on the Somali situation should know where the forces are. Does the UN have any knowledge of Eritrean people in Somalia? Or is it just justification for the occupation of the Ethiopian forces in Somalia?
Aid agencies say a humanitarian crisis is building, with over 1 million people displaced by the fighting, facing shortages of food and medicine. The fear is that if the fighting doesn't stop soon, it will escalate into a regional conflict, dragging in all of Somalia's neighbours in the Horn of Africa. John Terrett, Al Jazeera.
A war of words has erupted between the United States and the Taliban over one of the group's top leaders. The U.S. Air Force says it killed Akhtar Mohammed Osmani in an air attack 4 days ago near the Pakistan border. It's a claim being disputed by the Taliban.
Meanwhile, U.S. military officials say it took some time to gain intelligence confirming Osmani's death.
He was the chief of the Taliban's military operations, so his death is very significant and will hurt the Taliban's operations. They will no doubt reconstitute his position. They'll put somebody else in that role who will take a while to get up to speed. But Osmani was an associate of Osama bin Laden, Mullah Omar, and Hekmatyar. He had built up relationships with key figures in their terrorist organizations, so replacing him will be very difficult.
Al Jazeera correspondent James Bays is in Kabul. He's spoken to a Taliban spokesman who says Osmani is alive and well and remains one of its senior figures.
During the time of the Taliban government, Mullah Akhtar Osmani was one of its most senior figures. For a time, he was the governor of Uruzgan province. He was also the commander of the Taliban's No. 2 Corps based at Kandahar. After the fall of the Taliban, he was captured by special forces and put in an Afghan jail, but in 2002 he bribed his guards and escaped, and ever since has been one of the Taliban's lead commanders in their guerrilla war against the American-led coalition and NATO. Today, the coalition has released this press release, which says that a couple of days ago, in an airstrike, he was killed while in a car in Helmand province, along with 2 of his guards. Now, we've taken the details from this release, and Al Jazeera has now spoken to a Taliban spokesman. He is denying this report. He's saying that the man who was killed in Helmand province was a local commander called Abdul Zahir.
The Sudanese government has told Al Jazeera the first phase of UN peacekeeping operations in Sudan will begin next week. It follows an agreement by Khartoum to accept a hybrid force in Darfur, but a foreign ministry spokesman has indicated the majority of the troops would need to be Africans. El Sadiq Al-Maghli says he expects about 10,000 troops in Sudan by the end of phase 3. The first phase of troop deployment starts on Tuesday.
Phase 1 consists of 105 military personnel, 33 UN police, and about 45 UN staffers, along with logistics such as, for example, we have 36 armed personnel carriers. We have some night vision goggles. We have also global positioning equipment.
So, what brought about this change of mind? Previously, the President, Omar al-Bashir, had rejected the deployment of 20,000 United Nations troops to support the weak African Union force of 7,000 soldiers, which is already there. Violence has escalated sharply in Darfur in the last few weeks. Sudan's government and the pro-government Arabist militias are accused of war crimes against the region's black African population. This month, aid agencies withdrew some 258 workers because of that violence. Now, since early 2003, the fighting has killed more than 200,000 people and a further 2 million people have been displaced. But those figures are, of course, disputed by the Sudanese government. Last week, the United States warned Sudan it would face sanctions if it did not agree to an international peacekeeping force by January.
There's been an explosion outside a government building in Nigeria's southern oil hub, Port Harcourt. The blast came less than an hour after militants said they would detonate 2 car bombs in the region. It's not yet known if there were any casualties. Nigeria's oil production has been cut by a quarter this year due to violence by groups seeking ransoms or political influence. And it's decision day in New York for sanctions against Iran. The United Nations Security Council is expected to vote on a draft resolution over Tehran's refusal to stop its uranium enrichment program. Sanctions could include a ban on nuclear-related technology, weapons delivery systems, and a freeze on assets. The draft resolution's been repeatedly amended after objections from Russia and China. Now, Iran says the sanctions won't stop its nuclear program, which is for peaceful purposes only. And on the streets of Tehran, Iranians say imposing sanctions is not the best way forward.
I think the only way is negotiation, and both sides can reach a good result through talks, especially since Iran has said that its activities are peaceful. I don't think these issues will be sorted out with sanctions.
Naturally, they would impose sanctions because they want to put pressure on us. And definitely the sanctions will have a bad effect and result for the Iranian people. But it's nothing new.
Malaysia's worst floods in memory have displaced nearly 100,000 people and left at least 7 people dead.
The government has been criticised for its handling of the crisis amid food problems and distribution and looting.
Now, unusually heavy monsoon rains fell on the southern states earlier this week. The floods have now spread to central and northeastern parts of the country as the rains continue. Al Jazeera's David Hawkins reports.
Much of southern Malaysia is still underwater. Floods not seen in a century have driven more than 90,000 people from their homes and threatened to destroy billions of dollars worth of crops. If the water doesn't recede, palm oil and rubber tree plantations will be ruined. The worst flooding has happened in the states of Johor, Kelantan, Pahang, and Malacca. The rain has stopped, but because of the high tides and the runoff, the water's still rising here. The worry now is there are more storms to come. Rominuddin Mat Dali and his wife Noor are the last of their family to head for dry ground. But before they leave, they're trying to salvage a few things from their home. I never thought it could get this bad, he says. Since I was a boy, the water never rose higher than my ankles. Now, it's up to my waist.